This is the I Heart My Life show. Welcome to the I Heart My Life show, where we help driven women create a life that's better than their dreams and never settle for less. And someone who definitely hasn't settled is today's guest, Emily Paulsen. She is living her life on her own terms and is the founder of the Electric Collab, a branding and web design company for leaders, and the host of the Curious Life of a Childfree Woman podcast. She is child-free by choice, and on this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about that choice and how she ignored societal pressures around what life should look like as an amazing, ambitious woman living in today's world, and cover a little bit more around that choice and how she decided to live her life in that way and is on a mission to support other people and removing that pressure and getting curious about what's right for them. So welcome to the show, Emily.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you here too. So, one of the things I want to dive into first and foremost is a little bit about your background, because I know you're multi passionate, much like myself. So, how did you first get into the world of branding? And I know that's a long story, a long history, but give us the bullet points for that.
Okay, I'll give you the short version. Yeah, I mean, really, my entire life, I have disdained the idea of being just like everybody else. And I don't know where this comes from. This is something for me to unpack in therapy, but this idea of being basic or boring or fading into the background just almost scares me. That feels so in opposition to the life I want to live. So, growing up, I was always into creative pursuits, drawing, writing, putting on dance shows for the entire neighborhood, selling crafts, like inventing little things and then trying to get people to purchase them or all this stuff. And that kind of just continued through my life. And when it came to the time to think about, okay, what do you want to do as a career? I really wanted creativity and the option to use my voice and amplify other voices. That was something that was always on my mind. And I also wanted to make a lot of money. I thought that was important as a high school student or college student. And so I decided to choose marketing and fashion merchandising and things where I felt like, okay, this is real business. Like I could be quote unquote successful in these industries without sacrificing my creativity or, all of this stuff that I felt really passionate about just as a girl in the world growing up. So that's what kind of led me into that field. And then I've worked in that ever since. So all my jobs were in branding and marketing. I worked for some pretty big corporate companies we've all heard of. I've worked in the startup and kind of scrappy small business space. And then eventually decided to start my own brand studio. As you said, Electric Collab, that's what I'm doing now. But I think the through line is sort of a combination of wanting to be creative and also just wanting to help people feel seen. I was not conscious of that as an 18-year-old. I'm barely, I'm kind of awakening to that now through all the support and self-development stuff that we all do. But yeah, this idea of helping people find their voice, find their passions, and bringing that to life, kind of packaging that in a way that people can connect with. That's really what branding is, whether it's a personal brand or a business brand. It's the way people understand us. So I think there's kind of a connection to that in everything that I've done.
I love that. And it's so funny because I was actually talking to one of our mutual colleagues and she was saying the same thing. She's like, my biggest fear is not being seen and not standing out. Like, I don't want to just
Mm,
fade off into the background. And I think a lot of people can actually relate to that because it's not that we want to be visible all the time, but we want to be able to have an impact and we want to be noticed and we want to do something different. And I think that's actually really beautiful because how often did people grow up thinking they needed to fit in? And so
mm.
we've really started to shift that narrative and to celebrate diversity and what makes us unique and bring that to the surface. And I know you do that with your clients. You bring that to the surface through web design, branding, marketing. And I think that's really important to champion and also acknowledge that things are shifting in the right direction.
Yes. Well said. It's beautiful to see the shift. And I feel like it's kind of a lot of things colliding, at least for me in this phase of life. I'm 38, and you do get to a beautiful place. And from what I hear, this just continues to deepen where you do care a little bit less about fitting in and you really want the opposite. Those days of middle school where it's like, please, God, mom, buy me the jeans that everybody else has. So I look like everybody else. You grow out of that, which is such a beautiful part of getting older and growing into ourselves. And just as you said, culturally, the fact that we are celebrating diversity and differences and choice and individuality a little bit more, I think that's a beautiful transition.
Yeah. And I think, for me growing up, we both grew up in Ohio, correct? You grew up
Yes.
there? Yeah. I wasn't sure if you just spent a little time here. And one of the things that I was kind of like thrust into being a little bit different because I was always really tall. I got my period when I was 9 years old. And so I went through
Mm,
puberty like really early. And so I looked completely different to my friends. And it actually didn't bother me. The other day, my husband was saying, well, you're going to have to help Charlotte, our daughter, if she goes through something like that, because I'm sure it was really hard. And
mhm.
of course, like not everyone was nice, but it didn't bother me that much because I remember my mom telling me, you're going to love being tall. At some point, you're going to love being tall. And I kind of thought to myself, okay, well, I'll just try and love it now. And it helped me in sports. It helped me in so many different areas that I started to see it as a good thing. And so I think it's really important that we change that narrative as soon as possible, especially for, those little ones in our lives or the people that we impact, because things can shift and we don't have to grow up wanting to fit in.
Good for you that even when you were younger, you're like, okay, let me embrace this thing that's different about me. Because I do think it's hard. And you're right. I mean, even the things that we're not conscious that we're saying about ourselves or about women on TV or whatever, like it all matters. It all becomes part of the cultural conversation for the little ones around us and even the grown ones around us. We all kind of, this stuff soaks in to our brain and our perception of ourselves. So, you're so right. The sooner that we can shift our mind to highlighting all the things that make us different, the easier and honestly, the more fun life becomes.
Yeah. And I want to talk about that and kind of keep that as a theme for today's conversation because you are multi passionate, you're a multi hyphenate. So many of the ladies in our audience, the people in our audience, I should say, are the same, where they like to do a lot of different things. And for me, when I started in the coaching space, there was very much a mindset around picking one ideal client, picking one thing that you do, just launching one program, sticking with it, getting traction in that, and then going to the next thing. And to a certain extent, I agree that it's obviously easier to do less and to do less
Mhm.
better. But I do think that that narrative can be damaging because we end up trying to fit ourselves into a box and it's kind of like cutting off a limb. Like if there's something that's really exciting you or feeling really passionate about it, but you can't do it because it's going to affect the other thing, it
Mhm.
feels just very segmented. And so I'm curious to know your perspective on that because obviously you help people in the world of branding and marketing. What is your advice there? Like, are you looking at the whole person or are you saying, let's just take one portion and focus on that and then go to the next thing?
Yeah, great question. People ask me about this all the time.
Yeah.
And I think the idea of niching down or getting really narrow on who your target audience is or exactly who you're talking to, I think that started with good intention. I mean, to sell services, to sell a product, if we're thinking about this from a business perspective, even to sell speaking services or books or, to sell yourself as a speaker or something kind of in the personal brand space, people have to understand how you help them, how you benefit them, how you add value. So I think maybe an easier route, or what we used to think an easier route to accomplish that, was to say, okay, I help moms who are 40 years old and, living in the suburbs, or okay, I'm a weight loss coach for women over 50 who left the corporate world. We try to, like, as you said, really box ourselves into these archetypes or these demographics. But that is extremely limiting. And I think it's much more valuable, if we use the word niche, to niche around the outcome that you deliver. And, if you have a beautiful process or you offer a transformation or even you offer a product, get extremely clear on why that is uniquely special and let anybody who wants that step forward and be part of it, right? Like you can make a connection because you're being very clear and obvious. Like, this is what you get from working with me or buying from me. And the people who are seeking that will step forward. And then I think you have a lot more room to play because when we're talking about the value you deliver, you can bring that to life in so many different ways. So it doesn't have to be as narrow as, okay, I have a coaching container for this type of client. Oh no, I want to write a book. Well, is that for my existing client? Is that for a different type of client? Now, am I talking to two markets? Then things can get really complicated. But if you have always had an idea of the unique value you deliver, you can do that through coaching, you can do that through a book. You really open yourself up to a lot of modalities to serve without losing that clarity or emotional connection with the audience.
I love that. So it's more about leading with the process or the result or the method of getting people that result versus a specific
Yeah,
group of
leading with
people.
what they get. We all want to know what's in it for us. If we're going to give
Yeah.
up our money or our time, or our energy. Like, why would I do that? You got to convince me a little bit. So, yeah, I think showing what's in it for them, that value, that's the key.
And was there a big shift for you? I know you worked at places like Abercrombie and Fitch. Was there a big shift when you went from that world into the entrepreneurial space in terms of not only like what you were teaching people, but what you experienced from the companies and the clients you worked with? Like, I'm just curious to know how that process was going from such a different role to what you do today.
Yeah, there's definitely some differences. And there's things that are the same. I mean, really, the ethos of branding, like what branding is all about, branding is the way people understand us. It's the first impression and lasting reputation of any business, or if you're putting yourself out there as a personal brand of you as an individual. And that's the same for Abercrombie and Fitch and the Wendy's company, just like for you and I and every other entrepreneur that we've served. I think the difference comes from those organizations have huge machines behind them. And, with Abercrombie and with Wendy's, I wasn't there. Well, there was a little bit of crossover, but generally, it's not the founder that is extremely present in everything that's happening. The things get extrapolated out through teams of literally thousands of people, and everybody has kind of signed on to the mission. Like the whole goal of employee training and onboarding and how you see your sales results, it's all about like, this is who we are. We know who we are. We know what we're doing. I just have to check my box as a cog in the machine here to do my part to achieve this mission of selling, expansion, whatever the big company mission is. With entrepreneurs, we have to continually hold that belief or that buy in the mission and the value that we deliver all the time, pretty much by ourselves, right? Even if we have a team, we're directing the team, we're inspiring the team. Still our responsibility to say, this is what this business is all about. This is how we change lives. This is who we're here for. This is why this work is meaningful. And that gets hard, like we're just one person, right? So it gets hard at times to it's easy to step out of that or slip out of that. So I just feel like there's this extra layer of challenge where it's not just like, okay, do I have a brand that's built that positions me the way I want to be positioned and gives me the language I need and the consistency and the design and the digital presence? Like, yes, all of those pieces, like those are the tactical things you need in place. But your own commitment to them and belief in them, I think that's the hardest part. And that just doesn't come into play in big companies because it's just not as personal.
Oh, that's so true. And I've spent so many years working with new coaches, and it can be so exhausting for them because they didn't really start a business to learn about marketing and to understand how to build a website and design
Hmm.
and branding and logo and social media posts. Like they just want to coach, so many of them.
For
And
sure.
it's so hard because, we're taught that building a business, getting a business up is relatively easy. Like I could tell somebody in just a few sentences, do this, this, and this, and your business will be up. But like actually selling and marketing and delivering the service, especially if you're the one person show, it's really, really challenging. And so,
Mhm.
what would you say to people who are listening who are like, you know what, I'm kind of wearing all the hats right now? What would be some of the key components to focus on that you are seeing currently make a big difference for people getting out there and having success when it comes to marketing? And I know that's a loaded question, but just a few things that might help people.
No, it's a great question. I think the most important thing, and this is a small thing, small as in it's only a few words, but that makes it even harder. I think the most important thing is having a brand headline. So, this is your hook, like the 5-second thing that if you are on a coaching call or you're in a community networking thing and they go around the room and they say, Emily, what's your business and what do you do? What do you say in answer to that question? And it needs to answer 3 questions. It needs to say what the business is, like, what do you do? Are you a coach? Are you an inventory management? Are you a wedding planner? Like, what is this business? Who is it for? And why is it valuable? So, just hearing me say that, it's like, okay, already, yeah, that's kind of hard to boil it down to something you can say in 5 seconds, but spending the work getting that sentence right will serve you forever because not only does it give the people you're saying this to over and over and over again clarity, like, okay, I know what her business is, I know who it's for, and I can quickly determine whether or not that means it's for me, and I know why this is worthwhile. I know why it's worth me paying attention to. That's what you want people to understand from you. And then also you can rely on that again and again for your own decisions in the business. And like, okay, is this collaboration opportunity or is this podcast opportunity or all these things come your way and sometimes it's hard to know where you should be spending your time. Just gut check yourself with that headline and think, okay, are these things furthering this mission or not? And I think that can save you a lot of time. So that's an important piece. Having some sort of digital presence, of course, as a brand studio, I'm a huge believer in really intentional, thoughtful UX driven websites. But if you're not there yet, have a simple, straightforward landing page that has that headline, a very brief story about who you are and why you have expertise in this space or why you're in this space, and a way for people to get in touch with you. It can be very DIY in those early days. And I actually recommend that while you're getting proof of concept and getting those early clients. But you just want something where people can get all of those pieces from you in one place. We have Instagram, we have LinkedIn, establish something that you can own and really drive people to from the beginning. I think that's another important piece. But I think back to what we were talking about before of kind of holding the belief in the vision, in the brand, and that being such a challenging part. I think the last thing I'll add is just being clear on why you believe this work matters so much. And not just because you want time freedom and money freedom, and all of those things are super meaningful. Realistically, I want those things too. But when you bump up against these challenges of capacity and you're working really late and you're missing some family function because this client ghosted you and those things when it gets really hard, tuning in to like, why do I even believe the world needs this? I think that connection to your own soul and your own commitment is what gets you through those hard times.
Oh, yeah, I agree completely. I love that you shared that because it's always going to come back to that belief. Your belief is going to drive your action or inaction. So it's really beautiful. I'm curious to know what would be your 5-second phrase?
Electric Collab is a brand studio that does custom branding and web design for leaders scaling service based businesses and personal brands, giving you a brand built for where you're headed, not just where you've been.
Oh, wow. Love it. And do you have
Thanks.
another sentence or phrase for yourself? I mean, I don't know if you consider yourself a personal brand, but I feel like you're moving into this new area with the Childfree Woman podcast. And I'm just curious to know if that means you're also stepping out as a personal brand.
Yes, I am stepping out as a personal brand. And no, I don't have my headline yet.
Okay.
And
Well, I'm going to
honestly, like
make mine and then,
yeah, make yours or we can help each other. And of
yeah.
course, like, it's like the cobbler with no shoes, right? It's so hard to do this stuff for yourself, which is why I think outside perspective can be so helpful. But yeah, I mean, I think the challenge for all of us in the personal brand space, and I'm also not somebody who believes everybody needs a personal brand, to be honest. I don't know your feelings on that. But yeah, like finding that through line and the way to articulate when you are a multi passionate person, if you have multiple things that you're sharing with your audience or promoting or whatever, finding that red thread and being able to say that just as concisely as you can describe any one of your businesses, I do think that's important. And I also think it's hard. So that's literally what I'm working on. That's like my big February goal. So I'll let you know.
Yeah, I'll do the same. And I just hired a talent agent and she said we need to come up with 7 words that I can
Mm,
say about, exactly what I do and how I serve. So I'm working on it with multiple people. So we'll see what happens. But, I agree with you completely. Like there is a through line in everything I do, even though there's multiple brands. And that's been something that's been very challenging for me to figure out. But I feel like this year it's really come together and it's a lot clearer. And, just to kind of close the loop on the branding and marketing part of our conversation, I do think there is something to be said for simplicity. And I think for me, I've made things a lot more complicated than they needed to be. And also, that's because my thinking was a lot more complicated than it needed to be. I think actually my ideal clients across my multiple brands are very similar. They're just at different stages in their
mm,
journey. And so they're not completely separate. I'm not speaking to 2 different types of audiences. And so I think like having someone like yourself where you can kind of have more zoomed out vantage point on someone's situation and what their passion is and what their business looks like is very helpful because sometimes we're just so close and we're just in our heads and we just end up spinning and not
mhm.
really having the clarity when it could be made a lot simpler.
Yes, and isn't that good news that
Yeah.
simplicity is actually the key, right? We do get so close to it. I feel like every client I've had, I'm always saying it's not that you don't know, it's that you know too much. There's so
Yeah.
much you could talk about and your experience, your expertise, why this is valuable to you, how you want to help people. there's so much there and it becomes our whole life, sometimes our whole identity. So, yeah,
Mhm.
just that outside reflection piece and really what does the new to you person, the potential client, potential customer, what do they need to know just to take the first step, right? Just to kind of step into your world. That perception, just getting us out of our own way, can be helpful for anybody.
I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. Before we get back to the interview, I wanted to share a little something I think you'll find valuable. If you're looking for more clarity on what you want in life or feel like something is holding you back, I've created a free Dream Life Guide just for you. It's a step-by-step resource to help you get clear on your goals and break through any mindset blocks that might be in the way. You can grab it at iheartmylife.com/guide. And as a bonus, I've also included a private podcast feed to go along with the guide to give you even more value and support. So head over to iheartmylife.com/guide to download it for free. All right, now back to the conversation. So, talk to me a little bit about your personal decision not to have kids. And then I want to open up the conversation to, the podcast and where you're moving with that. But I'd love to know a little bit more about your journey personally.
I'll try to give a relatively short version of this story too. As you said, I grew up in Ohio in a relatively small town. I loved my life in Ohio. I still go back all the time. I live in Chicago now. And everybody in my world had kids. Like when I was a kid, every woman that I interacted with either had kids or wanted kids. And I just assumed that that was the life path. Why wouldn't I? That's all that I ever saw. And even the way that little girls play, I was always having girlfriends over and sleepovers with like different girls in the neighborhood. And we were acting out these motherhood archetypes. We were playing with baby dolls and we're playing with Barbie. And even though Barbie is rich and she's independent, we would still have her get married to Ken and then they'd have a baby. It was just like that was the storyline that I was used to. So I always assumed that eventually I would want that too. Maybe when I got a little bit older, then it was like maybe when you find the right job, maybe when you find the right partner, maybe when you feel like you have more money. And, the years just kept coming. And once I kind of graduated from college and was in my early 20s, I just felt like I'm further away than ever from seeing this for myself. And I don't know how else to explain it other than to say it just felt so disconnected from who I was or the life that I wanted. And it didn't take me long to feel like maybe I just won't do it. If this is how I feel about it, and I've checked all of those boxes of kind of figuring out the other pieces of my life, what if I just never have to? And that felt like a huge relief to me, which was a really big sign that I really felt like an exhale, that I don't have to figure out how to desire this or how to fit this into this daydream that I have of my future. I could just not do it altogether. And I felt like my life would be so much more aligned with what I wanted. And when I came to that decision, I really over indexed on telling everybody about it. And I hurt some people's feelings and we had some hard conversations. And, I felt like I'd uncovered this secret that we didn't have to be moms and we can do whatever we wanted with our life. And of course, a lot of women who were excited about being moms thought that was offensive or at the very least strange, and we just were kind of having this disconnect. And I felt like, why doesn't anybody else think this is brilliant? And they felt like, why doesn't Emily see things the way we do? So, a lot of things that I still cringe about that I said or did or just went way too hard in kind of defending this choice that I thought was right for me. And since then, I have tempered that. I'm on no mission to convince anybody to do anything child free path or the child path. But really, what has led me to make this piece of my life more public is because I do think the fact that we have choice is really valuable, and being able to get to know ourselves and live with intention on this topic and others and do the life that's right for us, even if it surprises us. Like, if we surprise ourselves with what we decide we ultimately want, I think that's not just okay. I think that should be celebrated.
Yeah, that's so amazing. And, I really resonate with everything that you're saying. I know when I moved to London randomly, that was a big thing for my family and even friends, thinking that I felt like I was better than them or there was something wrong with Ohio. And That was never my intention, obviously. And then when I
Mhm.
married my husband, who's British, my mom actually left my wedding early because she was so upset. Like, I was
Mm.
leaving, I was going to be moving to the UK more permanently. And so, when we make decisions on behalf of our dreams and give ourselves permission to do the thing that is weird or different, we do end up hurting people in the process. I think that's just kind of part of the reality of it. But navigating that can be really challenging. So I'm curious to know, how did you handle those hard conversations, and were any of them, with your family? Because obviously grandkids is a big factor for parents. So how did you navigate that?
First, I'm sorry that you had that experience at your wedding, and I feel you on that. Had a lot of hard conversations, even about me moving to Chicago and leaving Ohio. So I'm sure moving all the way across the ocean sparked a lot of feelings. Yeah, I mean, I've been very fortunate that I've never felt an extreme amount of pressure from my parents or my family, and I know a lot of people do. And that adds a whole other layer of difficulty in holding the choice that's right for you because you feel like, am I robbing them of a life experience? And kids kind of have that effect, right? Like if I don't have kids, I have a brother. I don't know if he'll have kids. If neither of us have kids, our parents won't be grandparents ever. So, you can get really caught up in the layers of how these things do impact the people that we really care about. But I think that's a dangerous game, right? Like at the end of the day, we're all responsible for our own lives. And I'm not going to sacrifice my well being or my joy to give something that maybe would be nice to somebody else. Like, I just don't see that as my responsibility. And I actually think that would be a disservice to these future imaginary kids if it was like, oh, well, I really
For
wanted my
sure.
mom to have a chance. Like that's not fair
Right.
for anybody at all. And also, like, life is unpredictable. Anything could happen to anybody, like it's just, I don't think we could think that way. But yeah, I think having those hard conversations when I was younger and sort of developing a thick skin to people's reaction or, things I get now, like how sad or you're missing out on one of life's greatest joys. You're going to regret this when you're older. Who's going to take care of you? Like I could go on and on with the things people say. And I think it comes back to just really knowing yourself and like, what am I going to do? Acquiesce on this major life altering choice because the checkout girl at the grocery store said that I'm going to be lonely when I'm 80? Like, that's not a reason. I can't jeopardize myself for somebody else, whether it's our mom or a stranger or whatever. I think it just basically dealing with it and
Yeah.
just having to kind of come back from those things, I think has helped me a lot.
Totally. And, I knew that I wanted to be a mom, but I didn't always know that I wanted to carry a child. So I looked into surrogacy at one point. But
Mm,
before that, before I was even ready to even think about that, I know I had a lot of pressure from my parents and other people in my life. And it just always surprised me because I'm like, I'm going to be the one taking care of this child. So how can you possibly like be pressuring me and telling me what timeline is good? Yes, you'll be involved, but like it's definitely not the same thing. Like I should really want this child if I'm going to be the one having it and raising it. So I do think it's very strange, and I can only imagine how challenging it is and, to get the comments that you get. And I remember getting comments because I waited till I was 38 to have a baby, when the clock was ticking or I'm running out of time. And I frankly just chose not to buy into that and to just
mm,
trust that if I was meant to have a child, I would have a child. And ultimately, like, I had to really dig deep and do a lot of soul searching. And I also read a few really spiritual books. One was called Spirit Babies, and was just questioning, like, do I want to be pregnant and how is this going to work? Because I think in my mind, I couldn't wrap my head around having a business and having a baby. But
mhm.
ultimately, I ended up having a dream about my daughter and a future son. And that, like, totally connected me to them, and it was such a beautiful experience, and I literally woke up and was like, "Okay, I'm meant to carry children." But I think it sounds like equally you woke up and had a similar clarity, in the opposite direction, but, like, I think for anyone not understanding it, it sounds like it's the same thing. You either know you want to or you know you don't. It's just a feeling. Is that correct?
Yes, well said. That's exactly how I feel. For most of us, especially when we're growing up, like maybe we don't have the motherhood instinct when we're 12, so you don't know like your whole life what's going to be right for
Yeah.
you. And then you're in this phase of trying to make a decision. And yeah, that's a beautiful thing that happened to you where it was like, okay, in one night, right? Like you were kind of on the fence, you were doing all the research, trying to visualize all the things. And then you had this moment of clarity, and that was the choice. I felt the exact same way. And I love this conversation because I do think this is part of just normalizing the child free life. Like, it's not about putting it on some pedestal or something or comparing the two. To me, they're the same. right? Like you either decide that you want to have kids and you do that, or you decide you don't want to have kids and you don't. And there is no better or worse. They're just two parallel paths. So, yeah, I love that comparison.
And when you were dating, because I know you said you had this clarity in your early 20s. I don't know if you'd met your husband yet, but when you were dating, did you tell people openly, and how soon did you tell them that you didn't wanna have kids?
Yes. So I was dating for most of my 20s. I met my husband when I was 29, now husband.
Okay.
So yeah, I would say this for sure. And, you go on a lot of crap dates.
Yeah.
Dating is fun and also hard. And I think it's one of those phases of life that is really hard to enjoy in the moment because you're always kind of worried, like, will I find the person I actually want to keep dating? And,
Yeah.
so dating is a complex thing. But yeah, as soon as I felt like there was any real interest or we were going to maybe consider being exclusive or anything like that, I was very upfront with it. And there were definitely people for sure that like that was the end of the conversation. That was the end of our interaction.
Mhm.
And I also think that's great. There's a lot of other things you have to talk about too. Like, well, where do you want to live? Like, do you want to work? Do you want to not work? Like, there are some key things we need to align with our spouse on, and having kids is certainly one of them. I don't want to waste anybody's time. And I also don't want to convince anybody or anything like that. So, yeah, I was super vocal about it. And I wouldn't be with my husband now if he wasn't on the same page as an individual. And we still got, how women get blamed. We still got people
Yeah.
messaging him that, why are you with Emily? That it was all coming from me and I'm robbing him of his chance to be a dad.
Wow.
That definitely happened, and from people who you care about and their opinion matters, so that was kind of another little challenging chapter, but it was important to me that he wanted to be child-free as a 29-year-old man on his own, and we were coming together as two people who shared a belief, not convincing anybody of our beliefs.
And did either of you ever have a fear that one of you would change your mind?
Yes, I did, for sure. And it's just so hard when you get married or you make a commitment to somebody, whatever that looks like. You can have all the trust in the world, but you'll never know their mind like you know your own mind, right? And I know the level of certainty that I have in this choice. I've known for a really long time now. So I questioned him quite a few times, kind of almost like testing him while we were dating, because we also dated for, I don't know, 8 years or something before we got engaged. So yeah, I mean, I would be like, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? To the point that he would get frustrated with me. Like, why are you questioning? I know myself, but I felt like there is a level of fear. And this is something that I'm never going to acquiesce on. So when we're 40 or 45 or whatever, you look at me and say, I regret this. I wish we had kids. What will that mean? Like, that's the disillusion of our marriage. That's a scary thought when you're madly in love with someone. So, yeah, I tried to like stress test him on it, which was not always well received. But it is scary, and I think that goes for having kids too, right? Like, it's still something that you can't really predict until you have them. And then, like, you go in with a spouse, and same thing with whatever decision you make. It's like we believe we're on the same page, we say we want the same things, and then you do it. And there's a level of risk there for all of us. Like, we're counting on another person, and neither of us can say for sure forever how we'll feel. So part of it's a leap of faith.
For sure. Yeah, and my husband and I waited 10 years to have a daughter, so we were married for 10 years, and so I think that there was, a point where he was probably like, "Well, are you ever gonna be ready?" Right? And,
Mm,
both of us, together as well, are we ever gonna be ready because we have these businesses and there's so much happening,
mm,
and so you do kind of question, like, is it gonna happen? Are we on the same page? And there is a lot to navigate on both sides of the spectrum, so I totally get that. And
yeah.
I'm also curious to know, so we've talked about a few themes today. I think one of them is definitely giving yourself permission. I also love that you shared that once you made your decision, you had a lot of relief. I think
Mhm.
relief is like an undervalued emotion, and it can be so telling for us when we feel that relief, to get the clarity that we've gone in the right direction. And then I know a big piece of the puzzle for you is that curiosity piece. So, can you talk a little bit about why, number one, that's a part of your podcast title? And number two, what does that word mean to you? And how do you live your life by that word?
I love the word curiosity. And sometimes in my mind and even the language I use to talk about the podcast, I kind of replace it or switch it out with learning. I mean, to me, curiosity is just an urge to learn, right? Like we want to ask question or we want to dive into something or get to know somebody. That is curiosity. And I've always seen myself as a lifelong learner, and it's also something that I want to protect in myself as I get older and as we all kind of naturally settle into routines, or you start to really want to rely on the things that you've already learned or the accomplishments or expertise, all of that. I don't know, that lifestyle to me, maybe it goes back to my fear of being boring, but I just always want to be injecting new things. I want to learn new perspectives from people. I want to learn about new topics. And, the world is changing all the time. Like, I have 100 things I want to do episodes on that are all super topical right now because there's just always so much out there. And I just think that being in a spirit of curiosity as a person, it makes you more open. I think it makes you more empathetic and just more fun, to be honest, to kind of have that personality trait that you just want to ask questions and listen and get to know new things. So, not that I'm great at it all the time, but I sort of want the podcast to be a gut check for myself and being open minded and challenging things and talking to innovators and that. So, the curiosity piece is really important. That's kind of the crux of the show. And then the idea of being child free is just about normalizing other perspectives and other life choices. But yeah, I think curious living, it's just the way that I want to live. And if I can do anything to help others embrace that, even if it's just tuning into a podcast once a week, that feels worthwhile to me.
I love that so much. Yeah, I feel like I have that same gene of always wanting to learn and being super curious. I remember my girlfriends growing up, we used to say, Emily likes to know stuff.
Yeah,
So
I
I'd
love
always want
that.
to know more and always have more questions. So I guess that's why we're both podcast hosts.
Probably. Yeah, I think it suits us.
Awesome. So the final question I want to ask before we sign off today is something we ask all of our guests. What would you say is one way that people can create a life that's better than their dreams, that far exceeds their wildest expectations?
Okay, I have two answers. One, curiosity. For all the reasons we just discussed, I think keeping that curious spirit and never resting on what you think you know about something, I think that's a really good way to live a life that exceeds what you think is possible now because you constantly learn new things. And another piece that I think is important but counterintuitive is patience. That's definitely the hardest thing for me. But I think when we get so focused on building our dream life or our dream business or having the dream marriage, dream house, dream whatever, it's like, I got to figure it all out right now. And I have to decide, like, well, what does that look like so that I can implement it today or by the end of next year? That's just not true. I think kind of the slow burn of being open and experimenting and getting to know yourself and then being willing to change, even if that means, in the little things like repainting your house or in the big things, changing jobs, relationships, whatever. I think ultimately, like, however long we have, when we look back, it can be a lot more fruitful to take our time and explore all of those tiny facets that come up all along the way versus trying to rush to some dream life finish line.
That's so good. I had that same experience last night because I'm working on a keynote and I knew I had this interview today. I'm doing YouTube filming. I just launched a new program, like literally all in 48 hours. And I was a little bit stressed. And my husband was like, just take care of yourself. You have a really long career ahead of you. And I was like, that's actually a really good point. I'm 39, knock on wood and God willing, I have a lot of years ahead of me. And so why am I trying to cram all of this in to 1 week? Like that makes absolutely no sense. So I appreciate you sharing what you shared because that is a great reminder for all of us. And for whatever reason, we think we need to do everything today, and that's absolutely not true. Obviously, we'll link everything in the show notes, but where's the best place for people to find you if they want to learn more, either about the branding side or the child free side?
Yeah. Instagram is probably the best. I'm there as Hey Emily Paulsen, and then you can easily get to branding content or the podcast. And then, of course, if you want to listen to the show, it's Curious Life of a Child Free Woman on any podcast platform.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time. I've loved this conversation. I appreciate you being willing to speak your truth and live your truth. It's so inspirational. And I know for everyone listening, regardless of, where they're at and regardless of what topic, whether it's children or something else, if we all just give ourselves permission to live out our truth, our lives will be so much richer and we'll be so much happier. So thank you for that reminder today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the I Heart My Life show. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with 3 friends or post about it on social media using the hashtag #IHeartMyLifeShow. And don't forget to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts. It really does help us spread the movement far and wide. Remember, everything you desire is possible. Keep believing in your dreams and taking action.